The summer of 2014 was scarred by a single, devastating event: the disappearance of 4 girls from a hiking trail just minutes from their camp cabin. One moment, their laughter echoed under the canopy of giant redwoods. The next, they were simply gone. For 2 agonizing years, their families lived in a state of suspended grief, relentlessly searching, praying, and pleading for any clue. The official investigation yielded nothing. Not a single footprint, not a shred of clothing, not a whisper of evidence. Then, in 2016, the silence was shattered. A woman's voice, trembling with fear, yet sharp with urgency, broke over the emergency line. She claimed her husband was responsible, that he had built a secret bunker deep in the forest and was involved in the camp girl's disappearance. The line went dead seconds later. It was the first tangible lead in 2 years, a fragile thread that would pull investigators toward a horror they were not prepared to face. The audio recording began not with words, but with the raw, unvarnished sound of panic, ragged, shallow breaths that hitched in the throat. It was the sound of someone pacing, trapped in the agonizing decision of whether to speak. Then, a voice, low and shaking, broke through. "My husband, he's done terrible things. He's involved with those missing camp girls. I think he killed them." A heavy pause followed. 3 seconds of dead air filled with the faint rustle of movement and the distinct creak of a floorboard, as if she had just glanced over her shoulder. "He has a bunker. It's near where they vanished. I can't live with this anymore. He's threatened me. My family." The call cut out abruptly, mid-sentence. At the county dispatch center, the operator's voice echoed into the void. "Ma'am, are you there? Hello? Hello?" There was only silence. The call display read unknown, and a technician confirmed it was a burner phone, utterly untraceable. The audio file was immediately flagged and routed to the task force that still nominally oversaw the long, cold case, filed under the same weary designation: Case 140723, Sierra Pines. Nearby, Sergeant Tom Heller had just settled at his desk with a paper cup of bitter coffee when the alert chimed on his phone. 2 years of chasing phantoms, of false sightings and psychic visions, had carved deep lines of skepticism into him. But this was different. He read the transcript once, then again, his eyes lingering on the details. A bunker. It wasn't a vague rumor or a hysterical claim. It was a specific, physical location, and the tip came from someone with intimate access to the suspect. He pulled the thick, worn case binder from his bottom drawer, its edges softened from constant handling. Flipping to the topographic maps, each one a layered tapestry of colored ink from past search grids, he felt a cold dread. They had combed the perimeter around Camp Sierra Pines 6 times. But if this bunker was subterranean and camouflaged, they could have marched right over it and never known. Heller called his captain, his voice tight. He got the approval for immediate mobilization. "You know this could be a wild goose chase," the captain warned, voicing the shared fear. "It could," Heller conceded. "But if it's not, it's the only real break we've caught in 2 years." By late afternoon, an unmarked SUV was rolling north toward the campgrounds, the binder open on Heller's lap. In the back seat sat Lena, the older sister of one of the missing girls, Chloe. Civilians were strictly forbidden from active search sites, especially family. But Lena had become a permanent, grim fixture. Now 20, she was all sharp angles and hollowed-out spaces, a young woman forged in the crucible of loss. She was 14 the summer Chloe left for camp. A bad case of the flu had stranded Lena at home. She remembered lying feverish on the couch when Chloe called, her voice bubbling with excitement about the cabins, the campfire songs, the massive redwood they'd seen on the trail. 3 days later, Chloe was gone. The SUV climbed into the foothills, passing sun-bleached ranch fences and faded billboards. Heat devils danced on the asphalt. With the windows down, the air was thick with the scent of dry pine and the distant, sweet tang of wood smoke. Heller studied the map, tracing the route to the Parson Jones redwood, the landmark where the girls were last seen. The caller had said the bunker was close. Deputy Carla Mendoza, who had been part of the original search team, drove in silence, her experienced eyes scanning every dirt pull-off and overgrown fire road. "You buying her story?" Mendoza finally asked, breaking the quiet. Heller stared out at the relentless blur of tree trunks. "If she's lying, she's committing to the details. A bunker isn't something you just invent." They reached the overgrown turnoff to the camp. The "Welcome to Camp Sierra Pines" sign hung crookedly, its cheerful yellow paint peeling away to reveal gray, weathered wood. The camp had been shuttered since the disappearance, and the cabins were now surrendering to the forest, their roofs sagging, their windows glazed with grime. Weeds split the gravel paths, and thorny vines crept over porch railings. Mendoza brought the vehicle to a crawl. "This is the end of the line. Trail starts here." Heller snapped the binder shut. "We go the rest of the way on foot." The forest enveloped them in a dense, muffled quiet, broken only by the sigh of wind in the high branches and the steady drip of condensed moisture. Their footsteps on the bed of pine needles sounded unnaturally loud. Lena walked at the rear, her hand constantly brushing the strap of her backpack. She had walked these paths before, with search parties, and once alone, each time returning with a heavier heart. Now, every rustle in the undergrowth made her flinch, her senses screaming. She couldn't stop imagining the woman on the phone, huddled in some dark corner, her courage finally giving out. The trail narrowed, winding between the massive trunks of ancient trees and moss-covered boulders. Lena's eyes, sharpened by years of looking, caught a patch of ground that seemed off too uniform, too bare. Crouching, she saw fragments of old, weathered glass embedded in the soil. Heller noted the location on his GPS, and they pressed forward. Minutes later, Mendoza stopped dead, her hand shooting up in a silent signal. Ahead, partially obscured by a blanket of leaves and fallen branches, was something metallic and unnaturally angular. As they closed the distance, the shape resolved into a steel hatch, perfectly flush with the forest floor, roughly 4 feet square. The metal was dull and scarred, but the edges were clear of debris, suggesting recent use. Lena's breath hitched in her chest. Heller dropped to one knee, sweeping away the forest detritus. There was no padlock, only a heavy, simple latch and a recessed handle. "This isn't on any survey map," he stated flatly. The very air felt different here, still and heavy, carrying a faint, acrid chemical smell. Lena strained her ears. Was that a low, mechanical hum coming from beneath their feet? Mendoza took a cautious step back, her hand instinctively moving to rest on her sidearm. "Sergeant, odds this is just some prepper's storm shelter?" Heller didn't answer. He was staring at the latch, the cool metal seeming to pulse with a dark promise. The woman had said her husband had a bunker. They were standing on its roof. Heller didn't immediately try the latch. He remained crouched, listening intently. The hum was real, a low, constant vibration, like a muffled generator. Mendoza completed a slow circle of the hatch. "No clear footprints, but the leaf litter here has been disturbed. Someone's been covering their tracks." Heller straightened, keying his radio. "Dispatch, this is Sierra 32. We have a confirmed concealed structure matching the anonymous tip. Possible underground entry point. Requesting immediate backup and a forensics unit to our coordinates." He turned to Lena, his expression grim. "You stay here, behind the line, until we secure the area." She nodded mutely, but her knuckles were white where she gripped her backpack strap. Every fiber of her being screamed to rush forward, to tear the hatch open and see if Chloe was down there. 15 minutes later, the quiet grove was transformed into a hive of controlled chaos. More deputies arrived, their radios crackling, and bright yellow crime scene tape was strung between the trees. A portable floodlight was set up, its harsh white beam bleaching the color from the steel hatch. Detective Ben Ruiz from the county's Major Crimes Unit joined Heller at the edge of the hole. A bear of a man, Ruiz moved with a surprising, deliberate grace. He knelt, running a gloved finger along the seam of the recessed handle. No lock. He relies on no one finding it. A deputy arrived with a heavy pry bar. The first attempt made the hatch groan in protest, but it held fast. Reinforced from the inside, Ruiz grunted. We're going to have to break it. The sound of the latch shearing was a sharp, violent crack that seemed to offend the natural quiet of the woods. Ruiz heaved the hatch open. A wave of cold, stagnant air washed over them, carrying a complex odor of damp concrete, rusting metal, and beneath it, a faint, sickly sweet undertone of decay. The floodlight pierced the darkness, revealing a narrow shaft walled with rough wood paneling and a metal ladder descending into blackness. The hum of the generator was unmistakably louder now. Gas-powered, Ruiz observed. That means recent activity. Heller peered into the abyss. 2-point entry. Weapons hot. Mendoza, you're on me. Let's go. A deputy with a carbine led the way, his boots clanging on the metal rungs. His voice floated up, tense but clear. Bottom is clear. Concrete floor. One door. East side. The rest of the team followed in a tight, practiced sequence. When Heller's boots hit the solid concrete below, the atmosphere changed. The air was thick, stale, and heavy in the lungs. The space was a low-ceilinged corridor, just tall enough to stand. Its walls a web of exposed wiring and shelves laden with canned food, water jugs, and cardboard boxes. The lead deputy gestured toward the sole door, a solid steel slab painted a dismal beige, secured by a heavy, industrial-grade deadbolt. If the caller was right, we could be looking at a tomb, Ruiz said quietly. Body cams on. The red lights of 2 cameras winked to life in the gloom. The deadbolt turned with a resonating clunk that echoed in the confined space. Ruiz pushed the door inward. The room beyond was illuminated by the weak, jaundiced glow of a single bare bulb hanging from a wire. Lined against the far wall were 4 military-style cots, their thin mattresses dressed in a sad collection of mismatched sheets, one with faded cartoon animals, another a plain blue, a third a floral print, the last striped. On each pillow, a distinct indentation marked where a head had recently lain. At the foot of each cot, a pair of shoes was arranged with eerie precision sneakers, sandals, canvas slip-ons, all scuffed from wear, but placed with their toes perfectly aligned. Lena, who had descended the ladder and was now peering from the doorway, pressed her hand hard against her mouth to stifle a cry. On a simple wooden chair in the corner sat a neat stack of folded clothing, the distinctive green-lettered T-shirts of Camp Sierra Pines, their colors still vibrant, their fabric unfaded, a stark impossibility if they had been exposed to the elements for 2 years. "These are theirs," Mendoza whispered, her voice thick with a mixture of horror and grim validation. Heller knelt by the pile of shirts, his gloved hand hovering just above the cool, neatly folded cotton. His eyes were drawn to a calendar tacked to the wall, its days meticulously crossed out with a thick black marker. The last marked date was a mere 3 days in the past. 3 days, Ruiz murmured, the words hanging in the stagnant air. If they were here, it was recently. Lena could bear it no longer. She stepped into the room, ignoring Heller's sharp look, Her gaze swept over the cots, the shoes, the shirts, desperately seeking any sign of her sister. And then she saw them, a pair of blue canvas sneakers, the white laces frayed and stained. Chloe had pleaded for weeks to get those exact shoes before camp. The sight of them here, so carefully positioned, felt like a physical blow. She sank to her knees, her hands trembling inches above the sneakers, unable to bridge the final heartbreaking distance. Mendoza's flashlight beam, probing the shadows under one of the cots, caught a pale gleam. She crouched and carefully retrieved a small, crumpled piece of lined notebook paper. The handwriting was looping, unsteady. "We can't see the sky. Please tell my mom I'm sorry." It wasn't signed, but Lena didn't need a signature. She knew her sister's penmanship. Her legs gave way, and she sat down hard on the cold concrete, clutching the tiny note as if it were the only real thing in the world. The team advanced, discovering a small alcove concealed by a curtain. Behind it were a portable toilet, a crate of water bottles, and shelves stocked with canned beans, fruit, and soup. A cheap, battered DVD player sat on a low table beside a stack of discs in clear plastic sleeves, one labeled in that same familiar handwriting. "Movie night near 12. "Might be innocent," Ruiz offered, though his tone held no conviction. Heller signaled for the crime scene technicians to begin their work. For Lena, the bunker was a living tomb, its low ceiling, sterile shelves, and regimented beds screaming of a prolonged, soul-crushing captivity. As they prepared to breach a second, sturdier door at the rear of the main chamber, Ruiz caught Heller's eye. "If that woman was telling the truth, Heller, this is just the antechamber. The real answers are in there." Heller gave a terse nod, motioning for the team to form up. Lena, still on the floor, could feel the thrum of her own pulse in her ears as the first deputy reached for the handle. The team stacked up silently at the rear door. It was smaller than the first, constructed of heavy, reinforced wood with a metal crossbar. Ruiz tested the handle, locked solid. He glanced at Heller, who responded with a single, sharp nod. "Do it." The first impact from the steel ram splintered the wood around the hinges. The second blow sent the door swinging inward with a crash. A new wave of air billowed out danker, colder, with a sharp, coppery undertone that made Lena's stomach clench and her instincts scream at her to retreat. This room was a claustrophobic, windowless cell, narrower and with an even lower ceiling. The walls were lined with warped, water-stained plywood. Against the right-hand wall, 3 large, opaque plastic storage bins were lined up with military neatness, their lids sealed with multiple, overlapping layers of heavy-duty duct tape. The tape was frayed in places, its adhesive yellowed and brittle with age, yet the bins themselves were clean, recently handled. On the left, a rusting metal shelving unit stood, buckling under the weight of its contents. It took Heller's brain a moment to process what he was seeing. On the top shelf sat 4 backpacks, each a different color and brand, but all unmistakably bearing the stitched logo of Camp Sierra Pines. The fabric was stiff with a fine layer of dust, yet one still had a faded friendship bracelet looped around its zipper pull. On the shelf below, a row of stainless steel water bottles stood, their surfaces a mosaic of peeling camp stickers. And below those, a jumble of fabric, which Heller carefully pulled free, unraveling into 4 distinct sleeping bags, one with purple stars, another a blue plaid, a third with yellow ducks, the last a pattern of red swirls. They carried the faint, musty smell of mildew, but as he unrolled one, a small, square photograph fluttered to the concrete floor. It was a candid shot of 4 girls, their arms slung around each other's shoulders, grinning in front of the camp mess hall, the immense trunks of the redwoods forming a backdrop behind them. Lena, watching from the doorway, gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She knew that photo. Her parents had kept an identical copy on their mantelpiece until the day the sight of it became too painful to bear. Ruiz moved to the bins. The sound of the duct tape tearing away was loud and grotesque in the silence. The first bin was packed with clothing children's t-shirts, shorts, pajamas. Some items were still neatly folded. Others were balled up as if shoved inside in a hurry. The second bin contained a pile of thin, worn blankets and a heap of stuffed animals. A few were missing their button eyes. One, a faded plush fox, had its tail hanging by a few threads. It was the third bin that made Ruiz freeze. He lifted the lid just enough to see inside, then lowered it slowly, his jaw muscles bunching, his face hardening. "This one stays sealed. Evidence techs only." No one asked what was inside. The finality in his voice was answer enough. In the rear corner of the room, a small, battered desk was pushed against the wall. On it lay a spiral-bound notebook, open to a page filled with neat, block-printed handwriting. The entries were dated. The most recent was from just over a week earlier. Heller read it aloud, his voice dangerously quiet. Day 702. Food delivery late. Girls upset. Told them they'll go outside soon. Need to fix the vent before summer heat. He flipped back through the pages. The earliest entries were from 2 years ago, mere days after the official disappearance date. They were written in a chillingly matter-of-fact tone, a mundane log of monstrous acts. Day 2, all 4 secured, no issues, kept lights off until dark. Day 9, subject C crying at night, others quiet, administered sedative. Day 30, replenished water jugs, will require another supply run soon. The calm, administrative language, the utter lack of emotion, made Lena's blood run cold. The person who kept this log wasn't a panicked criminal. He was a warden, a planner, a man maintaining a routine. Opposite the desk stood a waist-high locked metal cabinet, its paint chipped and scarred. "Bolt cutters," Ruiz ordered flatly. When the hardened steel of the lock snapped, the cabinet door swung open to release a powerful odor of stale chemicals. Bleach, lime, and something else, sharp and astringent. The interior was stocked with rows of plastic jugs, each labeled with black marker. Bleach, lime, peroxide. On the bottom shelf lay a tightly rolled bundle of heavy-gauge plastic sheeting, a box of industrial-grade gloves, and an unopened pack of heavy-duty zip ties. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the generator. No one dared to speak. Lena turned her back on the cabinet, fixing her gaze on the cracked concrete floor, as if by not seeing it, she could erase its terrible implication. "Generators through there," Heller said, pointing to a final door leading off the alcove. The space was cramped, dominated by the squat, rumbling generator and a single folding chair positioned in front of a small monitor mounted on the wall. The screen was divided into 4 quarters, each showing a grainy black and white video feed. One looked straight up the ladder shaft to the hatch. Another was trained on the forest path approaching the site. A third showed a stretch of cracked asphalt roadway with a faded yellow center line. The fourth was pure, dancing static. Ruiz leaned in close, his face illuminated by the ghostly light of the screens. "If this has been running, he's had a front-row seat for our entire approach." Lena's voice was a small, broken thing in the oppressive silence. Does this mean they were here? All of them?" Ruiz hesitated, choosing his words with care. "It means they were held here for a time." The qualification was a boulder dropped into the pit of her stomach. She looked down at the crumpled note still clutched in her hand. If Chloe had written those words, it meant she had been alive in this concrete hell, conscious enough to miss the sky, to feel remorse. That was a pain Lena wasn't sure she could survive. Above them, the world continued, the forest whispering secrets they were only just beginning to understand. Down in the bunker, they stood at the heart of a 2-year-old nightmare, surrounded by the ghostly artifacts of a captivity that had persisted far longer than anyone had ever dared to fear. The crime scene team moved with a grim, practiced efficiency, sealing items into evidence bags and photographing every chilling detail. Heller stepped away from the main chamber to radio in his preliminary report. "Captain, the tip was good. We have a confirmed underground structure, outfitted for long-term habitation. Personal effects directly link it to the Sierra Pines. Girls." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the rows of cots. This was a holding facility, and it was active until very recently. After he signed off, Ruiz joined him, his face etched with a cold fury. If the wife was telling the truth, our guy isn't just a predator, he's a planner. Local, knows this terrain better than we ever will. Someone who can blend in and avoid suspicion. Heller's eyes flickered toward Lena, who was being helped to her feet by a paramedic. And if he's married, Heller added, his voice low, she's not just a witness. She's a loose end. If he figures out she talked, he didn't need to finish the sentence. "We need to move fast," Ruiz concluded. Back on the surface, the late afternoon sun felt alien and harsh. As Lena climbed out of the hatch, the familiar forest seemed distorted, its peaceful silence now feeling like a lie. Her mind was a frantic loop, replaying the bunker's horrors, but one question rose above the noise. If the wife knew enough to call, what had finally pushed her to break her silence after 2 years of complicity or fear? Her thoughts were interrupted as a deputy emerged from the tree line, his expression urgent. "Detective, over here. We've got tire tracks, fresh ones, leading off the service road." Ruiz and Heller exchanged a look that was equal parts grim determination and grim anticipation. It was the first physical trail that might lead directly to the man behind the bunker and to the fate of the girls who were no longer inside it. The tracks were deep and clear, cutting sharply away from the gravel shoulder and into the thick undergrowth. The tread was aggressive, the earth at the edges still moist and crumbling. "Hours old, maybe less," Ruiz confirmed, kneeling beside the impression. "He was here, watching us. Or he left in a hurry when he realized the site was compromised." A deputy with a DSLR camera documented the pattern from multiple angles. "Tread width suggests a full-size pickup or a heavy SUV," he reported. Mendoza glanced back toward the hidden hatch, her face pale. "If he knows we found his playground?" Heller cut her off with a sharp shake of his head. The implication was clear. Their suspect was now in flight, potentially moving his remaining victims or preparing to vanish for good. The decision was instantaneous. 2 units would remain to secure the bunker for a full forensic sweep. The rest would fan out, following the tire tracks. Heller was firm with Lena. "You're with us. If he's still lurking out here, it's not safe for you to be left behind." She didn't argue, her resolve hardening. She had come too far to turn back now. They drove slowly, the convoy of SUVs crawling along the service road, their occupants scanning every possible turnout and overgrown path. The tracks would disappear under the gravel only to reappear 100 yards later, a ghostly trail left in the dirt. After 15 minutes of tense progress, the tracks made another, more definitive departure from the road, veering onto a narrow, rutted trail that was little more than a scar in the forest. It was barely wide enough for a single vehicle. Mendoza's voice crackled over the radio from the SUV behind them. "If he's got another hideout back here, it's completely off the grid. No power, no neighbors, nothing." Heller took the turn, the SUV lurching violently as its tires found the deep ruts. The world outside the windows became a blur of pine trunks and slapping branches. The air inside the vehicle grew thick with tension. The trail twisted and descended, finally opening into a small, secluded clearing. At first it appeared empty, a forgotten patch of land. But then, Ruiz pointed. There. Tucked against a wall of trees was a low, dilapidated shed, its wood weathered to a silver gray. Its corrugated metal roof was stained with rust, and parked beside it, half concealed in the deep shadows, was a battered, mud-spattered pickup truck. Heller killed the engine. The silence that followed was profound. The deputy with the camera compared the truck's tires to his photos and gave a firm nod. It's a match. This is his. Weapons were drawn as they moved in, a coordinated and silent approach. The shed's door hung slightly ajar, swaying with a soft, mournful creak in the breeze. Inside, the light was dim, filtering through cracks in the wallboards. The place had the feel of a frequently used workshop. A heavy bench ran along one side, cluttered with tools, hammers, wrenches, a coiled length of thick, coarse rope. Metal shelves were stacked with plastic bins, red gasoline cans, and rolls of duct tape. In the corner, an old wood-burning stove sat, cold and rusted through. It was Mendoza who found it. Tacked to the wall above the stove with a single, bent nail was a Polaroid photograph. It showed a man tall, broad-shouldered, with a strong jaw and close-cropped hair, standing next to a much younger woman. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. Both were smiling for the camera, but the contrast was jarring. His smile was easy, almost proud, while hers was a tight, strained line that never reached her eyes. "That's her," Mendoza whispered. "The wife from the call." Heller pulled out his phone, pulling up the audio file. He didn't need to play it. The memory of the woman's tense, frightened voice was seared into his mind. It was a perfect match for the anxiety etched on the woman's face in the photo. "Her name is Erin," he said quietly, the name giving a new, painful reality to the anonymous caller. On a shelf below the photo, amid a jumble of spare parts and oil rags, was a small, spiral-bound notebook. It was different from the clinical log in the bunker. This one was filled with hasty, handwritten notes, supply lists, reminders, dates. Heller flipped through it, his eyes scanning until one entry, dated just 3 months prior, leaped out at him. August 14th. Need to move her before the frost sets in. Ruiz, reading over his shoulder, let out a soft, sharp breath. Her. Singular. Not them. So at least one girl was still alive when he wrote this. The distant sound, when it came, was at first just a vibration felt through the soles of their boots. Then it resolved into the low, growing rumble of an engine. Mendoza was at the doorway in an instant. Vehicle. Approaching. Fast. The team scattered, melting into the cover provided by the shed and the trees. A dark green pickup truck, a different model from the one in the clearing, with a distinct dent in its front fender, slowed as it entered the clearing. For one frozen heartbeat, the driver's face was perfectly visible through the windshield, the same square-jawed man from the Polaroid. His eyes, sharp and scanning, swept over the clearing, the shed, the other parked truck. Then they widened in dawning comprehension. He had seen them. The green truck's engine roared, tires digging into the soft earth as it fishtailed backward, then whipped around to flee back down the narrow trail. "Stop! Sheriff's Department!" Ruiz's command was swallowed by the noise. The chase was on. What followed was a brutal, high-stakes race through a tunnel of green. Mendoza slammed the SUV into gear, Heller beside her, as a deputy guided a pale but determined Lena into the back seat. The trail was a nightmare, branches screeching against the paintwork, the vehicle bucking over roots and rocks. The truck ahead was a dark phantom, swerving and sliding, its driver exploiting his intimate knowledge of the terrain. It disappeared into a shallow ditch, emerging in a shower of mud, then accelerated again. Over the radio, a voice from the second pursuing SUV crackled. "License plate is partially obscured. Looks like tape. Can't get a clear read." The trail forked ahead. The green truck took the left branch without slowing. Mendoza followed, the SUV's suspension groaning in protest. They burst into a second, smaller clearing, choked with thorny blackberry bushes. The green truck was there, skidded to a stop, its driver's door hanging open. The man was gone, vanished into the impenetrable wall of the forest. "On foot!" Heller yelled, unholstering his weapon and plunging into the trees after him. Ruiz and 2 deputies were right on his heels. The sound of their pursuit shouting, the crash of bodies through undergrowth, was quickly muffled and absorbed by the dense woods. Lena stayed in the SUV, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, her eyes fixed on the spot where the man had disappeared. The waiting was a new kind of torture. Mendoza circled the abandoned green truck, her weapon drawn. The bed was empty, save for a crumpled blue tarp and a dented cooler. Inside the cab, she found the detritus of a life on the move. A crumpled flannel shirt on the passenger seat, a half-empty pack of cigarettes in the console, a warm, half-empty bottle of water on the floor mat. The keys were still dangling from the ignition. 15 agonizing minutes later, Heller and Ruiz emerged from the tree line, sweating and breathing heavily, their expressions dark with frustration. "He's gone," Heller reported, his voice rough. "He knows these woods like his own backyard. Could have a dozen more holes to crawl into out here." He leaned against the hood of the abandoned truck, his eyes doing one more sweep of the interior. And that's when he saw it. Looped carelessly around the gear shift was a small, pink elastic hair tie. It was frayed and stretched, and tangled in its fibers was a single, long strand of blonde hair. Lena, who had stepped out of the SUV, saw it at the same moment. The air left her lungs in a rush. "Chloe's," she whispered, the word a prayer and a curse. They bagged the hair tie with meticulous care, a potential lifeline to a missing girl. The truck was photographed from every angle before being called in for impoundment and a full forensic workup. As the sun dipped below the tree line, casting long, skeletal shadows across the clearing, the reality of their situation solidified. Somewhere in the vast, darkening wilderness, Mark Callaway was moving, and if his wife's desperate call was to be believed, at least one of the camp girls was still alive, and her time was running out. The green pickup was impounded, a silent, grimy testament to the man they were hunting. That night, back at the sheriff's office, the atmosphere was a volatile mix of exhaustion and electric tension. The forensics lab worked through the night, but a confirmed DNA match for the blonde hair found on the pink hair tie would take time. In the interim, Heller pushed for an all-points bulletin and an internal identification of the wife. When her DMV photo flashed up on the monitor, it was unequivocally the woman from the Polaroid. Her name was Erin Callaway, age 32. Her husband was Mark Callaway, a 38-year-old lifelong local, a heavy equipment operator by trade. His file noted he had done seasonal maintenance work for Camp Sierra Pines in the summers before its closure. Lena stared at the driver's license photo of Mark Callaway, the square jaw, the close-cropped hair, the calm, direct gaze, and felt a wave of nausea. She tried to imagine her sister, her vibrant, funny little sister, being looked at by those eyes for 2 long years. The thought was a physical ache. Heller studied Erin's file. "She's the key," he said to Ruiz, his voice low. "She knows his patterns, his other locations. But if she's scared enough to run, she's scared enough to hide. She won't just answer the door if we come knocking." Ruiz nodded, his expression grim. "We find her before he finds her. That's the play." And somewhere in the vast, dark woods, they all knew Mark Callaway was already several moves ahead. The break came from a motel clerk 30 miles north, a nervous man who called in after seeing the internal bolo. A woman matching Erin's description had paid cash for 3 nights, used a fake name, and insisted on the room farthest from the road. "She's still here," The clerk whispered into the phone. Saw her get ice this morning. Looks scared. Heller, Ruiz, and Mendoza descended on the motel just after dusk. The vacancy sign buzzed, its neon glow flickering erratically. The clerk, wringing his hands, pointed them to the last unit in a row of identical doors. Heller approached and knocked softly, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet evening. "Aaron, my name is Sergeant Tom Heller. We're here to help you. We need to talk about your husband, Mark." Silence. Then, from inside, a faint shuffle of feet, the scrape of furniture. Heller knocked again, more insistently. "Aaron, please. You're not in any trouble. But we found the bunker. We know about the girls. You're the only one who can help us find them now." The deadbolt clicked with a sound like a gunshot in the stillness. The door opened a bare 2 inches, the security chain taut. Aaron Callaway's face appeared in the sliver of space, pale and etched with a deep, weary terror. Her eyes darted from Heller to Ruiz to Mendoza. "You can't be here," she breathed, her voice barely audible. "If he finds out—" "He's already running, Aaron," Heller cut in, his voice firm but not unkind. "We found the bunker. We know what he's done. You were right to call. But we need your help to find the girls. Where are they now?" Her knuckles were white where she gripped the door. "I can't." "You can," Ruiz stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And you have to. He's not here to hurt you anymore. But other lives are at stake." For a long moment, she just stared at them, her chest rising and falling with rapid, shallow breaths. Then, with a trembling hand, she slid the chain free and opened the door. The room was Spartan and smelled of stale cigarette smoke and bleach. The bed was unmade. A single duffel bag sat zipped on the floor, and the burner phone lay on the nightstand like a guilty secret. Erin sank onto the edge of the mattress, folding in on herself, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. "I didn't know," she began, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I swear to God, I didn't know at first. I thought it was something else. Other women. Or maybe drugs. The odd hours, the supplies. But then I heard them." She looked up at Heller, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. But beneath the fear was a core of steel that had finally snapped. "I heard them crying. Down in the basement, through the floor. I heard one of them, a little voice asking for her mom." Heller kept his voice low and even. "Where are they now, Aaron? It wasn't just the bunker, was it?" She shook her head, a quick, jerky motion. "No. That was the first place, the one he thought you'd never find. He moved them after the last big search, after you all left the woods." Her voice dropped to a whisper, as if afraid the walls themselves were listening. "It's an old hunting cabin. It belonged to his father. It's off a logging road near Miller's Creek, past the old quarry. You can't see it from the air. The trees are too thick." A sob caught in her throat. He told me he could keep them there forever, and no one would ever know." Ruiz was already on his radio, his voice a low, urgent command, dispatching units to converge on the Miller's Creek area. Erin watched him, her body trembling. "If you go there," she said, her voice cracking with urgency, "you have to be so careful. He's got the place rigged, wires, traps. He said it was for bears, but it's for people." Heller met Ruiz's eyes, a silent understanding passing between them. If Mark knew his wife was gone, his first move would be to secure his assets, or eliminate them. "If he knows you're missing, he'll head straight there to clean house," Heller said. Erin's face crumpled. "Then you have to get there first." Outside, the night had deepened, the air cool and heavy with the promise of rain. As they hurried back to the SUVs, Heller caught Lena's eye through the window. She had heard every word of the exchange over the open radio. Her face was a mask of terrified hope. "Do you think Chloe's there?" she asked, as he slid into the passenger seat, her voice thin and strained. Heller, for once, did not offer a platitude or a maybe. He met her gaze directly. "If she's anywhere, Lena, that's where she'll be." The convoy moved out, a silent procession of dark vehicles. They killed their headlights 2 miles from the Millers Creek turnoff, navigating by GPS and the faint glow of the cloud-obscured moon. The gravel road was slick with a fine, cold drizzle. Heller's voice was a low murmur in the dark. "This is it. We go the rest of the way on foot. No noise, no lights, unless absolutely necessary." They parked in a tight cluster on an abandoned logging spur, the sound of their car doors closing seeming to echo for miles. The team assembled: Heller, Ruiz, Mendoza, and 6 other deputies, all armed and equipped for a tactical approach. Lena was ordered to stay with a deputy by the vehicles. This time, she didn't protest. The grim determination on the officers' faces told her this was no longer a search. It was a raid. They moved into the forest, a line of shadows swallowed by the greater darkness. The rain pattered a steady rhythm on the canopy above, dripping down onto their jackets and helmets. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and decay. Mendoza, on point, moved with a predator's grace, her night vision monocular scanning the path ahead. After 100 yards, she stopped, raising a closed fist. The line froze. Her flashlight, shielded by her hand, cast a sliver of light across the trail. A thin, almost invisible strand of wire was stretched taut, knee-high, between 2 young saplings. She traced it with her beam to one side, where it was connected to the trigger mechanism of a sawed-off shotgun, crude but lethal, bolted to a wooden frame and camouflaged with moss. "Shotgun trap," she whispered into her mic. "Trip wire, it's live." A deputy with bolt cutters moved forward, and the sharp snip of the wire being severed was deafening in the hush. The weapon was carefully disarmed and bagged. They pressed on, slower now, every sense heightened. The trail began to climb, switchbacking up a steep ridge. The second trap was even more primitive, and therefore more sinister. Mendoza spotted the subtle disturbance in the leaf litter. A pit, about 4 feet deep, lined with sharpened wooden stakes, its opening crudely covered with a lattice of branches and fresh leaves. "Punji pit," Ruiz murmured, his voice laced with disgust. "This isn't for deterrence. This is to kill." The discovery confirmed the stakes in the most visceral way possible. They were not just hunting a kidnapper. They were hunting a man who had fortified his lair like a warlord. They dismantled the cover and marked the location, their progress now a painstaking, nerve-shredding crawl. Heller's radio crackled with a low, static-filled report from the second team, approaching from the opposite side of the ridge. They had found fresh tire ruts, confirming vehicle access from another direction. The net was tightening. And then they saw it. Through a break in the dense pine and oak, a dark, angular shape materialized against the deeper black of the forest. A small, single-story cabin with a steeply pitched, sagging roof and a stone chimney. It sat in a small, unnaturally clear clearing, surrounded by stacks of firewood that had long since silvered with age. A single, grimy window showed a faint, wavering amber light from within. A kerosene lamp. They halted at the tree line, becoming one with the shadows. Heller raised his binoculars, scanning the structure. No movement, no sound, but the drip of rain. His gaze swept downward, to the muddy ground in front of the porch. And there they were. Footprints. 2 sets. One large, from heavy work boots, leading up to the door and back. And alongside them, a smaller, fainter set, the prints closer together, with a slight, erratic drag to the step. Ruiz's voice was a whisper in his earpiece. "He's here. Or he was, very recently." And he wasn't alone. The team held their position at the tree line, the cabin a dark, silent monolith against the backdrop of the murmuring forest. The rain had softened to a fine mist, clinging to their jackets and beating on the barrels of their weapons. Heller studied the footprints through his binoculars. The smaller set, with its unsteady, dragging quality, sent a cold jolt through him. It was the gait of someone weak, tired, or restrained. "Alpha Team, on me. We take the front," Heller whispered into his mic. "Bravo Team, with Ruiz, flank around and cover the rear. Look for any other exits. No one breaches until my command." They moved with a fluid, practiced silence, crossing the clearing in a low crouch. The porch steps groaned under their weight, a sound that seemed to tear the night in two. The front door was solid wood, slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of darkness. Heller pushed it open slowly with the barrel of his rifle, the hinges letting out a low, drawn-out whine. The smell hit them first, a thick, cloying mixture of kerosene, damp wood, unwashed bodies, and something faintly metallic, like old pennies. The single room was lit by a kerosene lamp on a rough-hewn table, its flickering light casting long, dancing shadows. The scene was one of recent, frantic habitation. A tin plate with a congealed lump of canned stew sat next to a metal cup, a wisp of steam still curling from its rim. A coarse wool blanket was piled on the floor near the table, as if someone had thrown it off in a hurry. Against the far wall was a narrow cot, its thin mattress sagging in the middle, the sheets a tangled knot. And on that cot, left behind in the rush, was a small, pink, hand-knitted sweater. It looked clean, almost cherished. Mendoza's voice was a hushed exhalation. "She's here. Or she was until minutes ago." They cleared the corners, the small closet, the space under the cot. It was empty. But the evidence was everywhere. The recent food, the warm cup, the sweater. This was no abandoned shack. It was a prison cell, and the occupant had just been evacuated. Ruiz's voice crackled over the radio from the back of the cabin. "Heller, we've got a rear door, and tracks. 2 sets, same as the front. They're heading west, down the slope. They're fresh. The mud hasn't even settled." Heller's mind raced. Mark had been here with one of the girls. They had a head start, but not a large one. The chase was now a matter of minutes, not miles. It was then that Lena's voice, tight with panic, broke over the general channel. She was still back with the vehicles, but a deputy stationed on perimeter duty had just radioed her. "Tom, a deputy just spotted movement about 200 yards west of your position. A man in a dark jacket, moving fast. He was pulling someone along. Someone smaller." That was all the confirmation Heller needed. "All units, converge. They're on foot, heading west from the cabin. Bravo Team, cut them off at the bottom of the slope. Alpha, with me. Go, go, go." The forest erupted into a controlled storm of motion. They abandoned stealth for speed, crashing down the muddy, leaf-strewn incline after their prey. The tracks were easy to follow now, the deep, aggressive impressions of the work boots and the scuffed, sliding marks of the smaller feet, sometimes dragged through the mud. They were closing the gap. Ahead, through a thicket of young pines, they caught a flash of movement, a dark, hulking shape, and beside it, a smaller, pale form, being hauled relentlessly forward. Mark Callaway heard them coming. He glanced back, his face a stark, furious mask in the fleeting glimpse they got, and yanked his captive harder, diving into a denser part of the woods. The girl, a slip of a thing in a light-colored shirt, stumbled and almost fell, but he wrenched her upright without breaking stride. "Sheriff's Department! Stop right there, Callaway!" Heller yelled, his voice raw. Mark didn't stop. He was a man possessed, using the terrain to his advantage, ducking under low branches, shoving through thorny bushes. But the girl was his anchor, slowing him down, her strength clearly failing. Heller, Ruiz, and 2 deputies poured on the speed, their lungs burning. They burst through a final wall of ferns and emerged onto the bank of a fast-moving, swollen creek. And there they were, trapped. Mark stood chest-deep in the churning, ice-cold water, one arm locked like a steel band around the girl's chest, the other hand pressing a hunting knife to her throat. The girl's eyes were wide with terror, her face pale and smudged with dirt. It was Chloe. "Stay back!" Mark roared, his voice echoing over the rush of the water. "You take one more step, and I swear I'll do it! She comes with me!" Heller skidded to a halt at the water's edge, his weapon raised but unable to get a clear shot. Ruiz and the deputies fanned out, creating a semicircle. "It's over, Mark," Heller shouted, fighting to keep his voice steady. "There's nowhere to go. Let her go, and this ends now." "Ends," Mark spat, a wild, desperate laugh escaping him. "This doesn't end. You think you know what this is? You have no idea." His eyes darted around, looking for an escape that wasn't there. The girl, Chloe, whimpered, a tear cutting a clean path through the grime on her cheek. In that moment of his distracted rage, Chloe acted. She didn't scream or struggle. With a sudden, desperate surge of strength, she threw her head back, smashing it into his face. He grunted in surprise and pain, his grip loosening for a split second. It was all the opening Heller needed. He launched himself into the creek, the freezing water a shock that stole his breath. He slammed into Mark, his full weight driving the bigger man backward. The knife flew from Mark's hand, skittering across a flat rock and into the current. They went under in a tangle of thrashing limbs, surfacing in a violent struggle. Ruiz and a deputy were in the water a second later, prying Mark's arms back, forcing his face into the gravelly bank as he cursed and fought with animal fury. Mendoza was there too, wading in and pulling a shivering, sobbing Chloe into her arms, wrapping her own jacket around the girl's slender shoulders. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now. You're safe." Lena arrived at a run, crashing through the undergrowth. She stopped at the water's edge, her hand flying to her mouth. She saw Mendoza holding a frail, trembling figure. She saw the familiar curve of the cheek, the shape of the eyes she'd dreamed of for 2 years. Chloe. The name was a prayer. Chloe turned her head, her gaze finding her sister's. The recognition was instant, a silent, seismic shift. Lena didn't wait. She splashed into the creek, not even feeling the cold, and wrapped her arms around her sister, holding her as if she might vanish into smoke. They sank to their knees in the shallow water, clinging to each other, their sobs the only sound that mattered. On the bank, Mark Callaway, subdued and handcuffed, was hauled to his feet. Water streamed from his hair and clothes. He looked at the sisters, then at Heller, and a slow, chilling smile spread across his face. "You got one," he sneered, his voice a low gurgle. "You think you won? You have no idea where the others are." Heller met his gaze, his own expression granite. "We'll see about that." The aftermath was a blur of controlled chaos and stark, emotional whiplash. Chloe and Claire were rushed to the hospital, wrapped in thermal blankets, their bodies frail, but their spirits fiercely alive under the layers of trauma. Lena never left her sister's side, her hand a constant grounding presence during the medical exams and the gentle initial interviews with child psychologists. The media, camped outside the sheriff's office, heralded it as a miracle rescue. But inside the precinct, the mood was grimly sober. They had 2 girls back, a monster in custody, but Mark Callaway's taunt echoed in the sterile interrogation room. "You have no idea where the others are." He was right. Seated across from Heller and Ruiz, his hands cuffed to a bolted-down table, Mark was a statue of smug defiance. He denied everything, then laughed, then offered cryptic, cruel teases. He demanded a lawyer, then demanded a deal, his eyes gleaming with the knowledge that he still held power. The evidence from the bunker and the cabin was overwhelming for the kidnappings of Chloe and Claire, but without bodies or locations for Maya and Jessica, the leverage for a murder charge was fragile. It was Chloe, in a moment of lucid courage between sedated sleeps, who gave them the next fragment. She spoke of a loud place. Not the bunker, not the cabin. A place Mark had taken them a handful of times. A rare, terrifying taste of the outside world, where the air itself seemed to vibrate. He'd blindfold them for the journey, but she remembered the sound, a constant, deafening roar that wasn't the gentle creak near the cabin. It was like the whole world was falling down, she whispered to Heller. The clue was vague, but it was something. The team cross-referenced topographic maps, identifying every waterfall and significant rapid within a 50-mile radius. Meanwhile, Aaron Callaway, now deep in the witness protection protocol, was shown satellite imagery. One location, a remote area near a decommissioned hydroelectric dam, made her go still. His father took him fishing there, she said softly. He never talked about it. He hated that place. The team converged on the area. The roar of water over the dam's spillway was immense, a physical force that drowned all thought. It was Mendoza who found it, a narrow, almost invisible fissure in the rock face behind a thicket of thorny bushes, leading to a small, damp cave. It was empty of people, but it screamed of presence. On the cave wall, scratched with a nail or a sharp rock, were 4 names: Chloe, Claire, Maya, Jessica. Next to Maya's name was a small, carefully etched cross. Tucked into a crevice in the rock beneath it was a single, hand-rolled cigarette. Forensics worked quickly. The saliva on the cigarette paper belonged to Mark Callaway. The discovery was a seismic shift in the case. They now had evidence directly linking him to Maya and Jessica and suggesting Maya was deceased. The district attorney finally had the leverage to pursue a murder charge. Heller went back into the interrogation room. This time, he didn't ask questions. He slid a photograph of the cave wall across the table. "We found your shrine, Mark. We know about Maya." The smug mask shattered. A tick started under his eye. The life sentence without parole was no longer an abstraction. It was a door slamming shut. In a cold, flat voice that stripped all emotion from the horror, he offered a deal. Full immunity from the death penalty and a transfer to a specific, less violent federal prison in exchange for the locations. The deal was struck, the paperwork a morbid formality. He led them to a shallow, unmarked grave near the dam, where Maya's remains were finally recovered, bringing a devastating, long-overdue closure to one family. And then, to a remote, dusty storage unit on the industrial edge of the county. The air inside was still and smelled of mildew and old cardboard. Among stacks of forgotten furniture and boxes stood a large, locked footlocker. When the forensic techs pried it open, the smell of cedar and decay washed over them. Inside, meticulously folded and preserved, were the camp clothes, a diary, the hairbrush, and the personal effects of Jessica Miller. There was no body. Under the terms of the deal, Mark claimed he had no idea what happened to her after she tried to escape one night near the old quarry. He said the woods, the river, the animals, the wilderness just took her back. Jessica was never found. She remained a permanent, haunting question mark in the official record, the one who got away yet never came home. The trial was a media circus, but its conclusion was a foregone conclusion. Mark Callaway was sentenced to multiple life terms in a maximum security prison, a small, concrete box to replace the ones he had built for others. The cameras eventually packed up and left. The town of Sierra Pines tried to heal. One crisp autumn day, years later, Lena and Chloe visited the redwood grove where it all began. The camp had been razed, the land slowly returning to wilderness. They stood in silence under the ancient, indifferent trees. "It doesn't feel over," Chloe said, her voice steady now, though her eyes would always hold a shadow. Lena took her sister's hand. The haunting wasn't in the woods, it was in them. It was in the empty space at the dinner table for Maya, and the endless, unanswered question that was Jessica. It was in the way Chloe sometimes woke up screaming, and in Lena's constant, low-grade vigilance that never truly switched off. "For us," Lena replied, her gaze fixed on the immense, timeless trees. "It never will be." The official case was closed, filed away in a records warehouse. But for the families, for the sisters, for a community, some stories don't have clean endings. They have a before and an after, and a long, long road of living in between. The rescue was not an end. It was just the beginning of a different kind of survival.